We live in a constantly changing world where the speed of information is changing how we think and act and connect with one another. When people in a society lose faith in their institutions, in God, and in each other, the nation collapses. We need help rebuilding trust and tying it all together. Welcome to All That to Say, a podcast exploring the interrelatedness of all things in long-form conversation. Bill and Gloria Gaither join Jim Lyon to talk about their love story, songwriting, and the power of words.
Welcome to All That to Say, and I am so thankful and pleased to welcome Bill and Gloria Gaither to our All That to Say studio. Bill and Gloria, always a privilege to be in your company. Thanks for carving time out for us today.
Thanks.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
I mean, your worlds are busy, and as long as I've known you, which has been a little while, you're not just sitting around twiddling your thumbs. You're not just letting the grass grow under your feet. You keep busy. I know, as I have read at least, that you're planning a new tour for 2022. Is that possible? That you're going to be on the road some?
Yeah.
And that'll take you for months on the road. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, you know what? We, from the very beginning, have really said that phone and the invitations are either going to control our lives or we're going to control it. And I think from the very beginning, we said, we can do this. But so when you say tour, that scares me because I think of 150 days out of the year. There are probably, about 10 or 15 weekends out of the year that we may do 2 or 3 dates. And that keeps this young man in touch with what's going on out there. So, yeah, but nothing at any length.
Well, maybe not in the length to which you once did it in some other epochs of your life, but still on the road, no small thing, taking an entourage. There's a lot of production. There's a lot involved with things like that. And I'm just bringing that up to say because Bill and Gloria Gaither have been on the stage now for some time. And for anyone who doesn't know, you have won Grammys. You have changed the world really of music in the gospel genre, I think. In fact, Billboard magazine said about Bill and Gloria Gaither that they did for gospel music what MTV did for rock. I mean, that's saying something. And actually, that probably refers to the way in which you pioneered and developed video and gospel videos in the Homecoming series, which really re-engaged a world and an audience in this genre of music and presentation that you love so much. What I'm suggesting is that some people might have said, all right, we're through, we're out. It's been a fun ride, but let me think about my grandchildren alone. You have grandchildren. I know you think about them.
7.
How many?
7.
7, there you go. And that said, you're still engaged in this calling. And that's really what it is. It's a calling. You have become a global phenomenon. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate for you. And then I want to ask you about a story that's just happened today before you came to the studio. But I traveled to India a great deal, and I've been many, many times. And I take people there, usually in small groups, to discover the subcontinent. It stole my heart when I first went, and I like it very much. One day, after having been literally 2 weeks in the outback of India, in places where Westerners like me don't normally show up. And I hadn't had a clean up shower for a while and so on. But before we left the country, I wanted my friends, there were just a few of us, to stop in Agra to see the Taj Mahal. And there was a very nice hotel there because many tourists come to see the Taj Mahal. So there was a great hotel, the like of which we hadn't seen for 2 weeks. I was so ready to go to that hotel and shower up, scrub up, get ready to fly home. Walked into the hotel, huge marble glass floor in the foyer, and there's a grand piano and a chandelier, and it's that kind of Indo-European film quality architecture and all that. And there's this guy, an Indian man, playing this grand piano in the middle of the foyer. And we're checking in and so on, and I had a friend with me. You may know him. He's my physician. His name is Scott Green.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Green.
Scott and I were traveling together, and you may not know, Scott's also a very fine musician. He's a great pianist. Anyway, Scott and I are there, and this guy's playing the piano, and he's not singing or anything, he's just playing. And as he's playing, I'm thinking, that tune, it's so familiar. What is that? And I'm looking at Scott, what is that? And Scott's just staring at me and kind of smiling. I said, Scott, is he playing Because He Lives? Which is a song that you folks produced and wrote. And Scott said, it is that. And we listened to the whole thing. It was Because He Lives. So after we got done playing it, here we are in the shadow of the Taj Mahal in a hotel. I walked over to him with Scott and we said, I want to thank you for playing. You're very gifted on the piano, and thank you for sharing your song and all that. And that last piece you played, it was just so lovely. And he says, I don't know what it's called, and I don't know even where I heard it. But once I heard it, I play it over and over again. And we said, Scott and I just looked at each other, we're shocked. He doesn't even know what he's playing. We said, well, we actually know what that song is. We know the people that wrote that song. And his eyes got big as dollars. You do? And we explained what it was, and his jaw just dropped open. Now, I'm sharing that story with you to demonstrate the reach of what you have given to the world. Now, that brings me to a story that just today, there have been some awful, devastating tornadoes in several states in the center of the country, Kentucky among them. Lots of devastation. Anyone who is familiar with the news has seen news events like this before. And this particular story finds a man who's in the ruins of his home, open sky above, the roof is gone, and he discovers a piano.
His piano.
It's his piano in his house. And nothing's left to him. His house is just a wreck. What does he do?
The interesting thing about it is that the people that lived there were saved because they went to a basement and were under a mattress when their home blew away, and 13 acres with it. And they had gone back. The storm had passed, and his sister was in a bedroom sorting through the soggy mess of what was left, trying to think if there was anything that could be salvaged. And she heard him playing.
Because he came up out of the cellar,
He came out of the cellar.
And saw the piano and just sat down to play.
Yeah, just sat down to play. And so she grabbed her phone, and he didn't know it. He had his back to her. The piano was facing the would-be wall. And she just started filming him. And she put it on her. He was playing Something About That Name.
Another song you've written.
Yes, and he and wrote it, in the early '60s, and she put it on her Facebook because other people that were her friends were also going through this horrible tornado that hit the center of Kentucky, and she thought it might be an encouragement to them. Had no idea that people would pick it up and it would go viral. Yeah,
and. Just the image of it, I haven't seen the video myself, but this image of a man at a piano that somehow survived the wreckage. And it's the only thing left in the room, as it were. And his reaction to the tragedy, his coping mechanism, the way in which he is trying to sort out what in the world have I experienced and what do I do next, is to go to the piano. And he's not a musician. I think, Bill, you thought he was an accountant?
Oh,
he is, but he's also a musician. The family's musical, but he's an accountant and a financial advisor.
By trade, that's his vocation.
Yeah.
When the press talked to him, one of the lyrics or lines in the lyrics is the kings and kingdoms may all pass away, but there's something about that name, and So he quoted that lyric, and then he said, "My little 13-acre kingdom
is gone.
Just like pass that. Away, but there's something.
There's still something about that name."
It's
it's something. I try to think back. Where were we? We were in our house, same house. We've lived in that same house, Alexandria, for 55 years now, right? And we were in that house someday. I don't know whether day or night. Working out that little melody, da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun, and she wrote the lyric to it. And they're like little babies. You just put them out there, and hopes they'll get some legs, and something will happen to it. The copyright people tell us we've written 7 or 8, maybe
800 songs.
Maybe 800 songs. And most of those songs are probably songs that people would not know or recognize. But you get a couple or three or four of them that might have some legs that crawl out beyond the county, beyond the state line, and then you go to Brazil, and there's 8,000 Brazilians out there listening to the vocal band sing, and you sing because he lives.
And they drown you out.
And they drowned you out in
right.
Portuguese.
In Portuguese.
Singing the chorus. Now, that is overwhelming for a couple little farm kids from Indiana.
Well, I mean, both the story I told about being in the shadow of the Taj Mahal with a man who didn't even understand the music, but couldn't forget it having heard it and could play by rote a beautiful arrangement because he lives in a hotel, to the man in a Kentucky field suffering the overwhelming loss of his home, both drawn, finding a moment where they are at peace because of something you wrote. Now, there's so much to unpack with that, but this story from the tornado, as you referenced, Bill, has been picked up by the news, and it jumps off the sister's Facebook page and it goes to the local paper, which somebody else picks up and goes to a national network, which goes to the Wall Street Journal, to the New York Times is interviewing you, Gloria, because they understand, that song he was playing was written by the Gaithers. And so they're talking to you about it. What did they ask you about it?
Well, she wanted to know, how we wrote the song and how we felt that it came that circle. And I found myself telling her, you write songs in solitude. I mean, it's just usually Bill and I in the living room, and they all come out of our lives talking about things over the morning coffee and things in our lives and our children. And this particular song actually has a spoken part that came from our little daughter who had chronic infections that made her fever spike when she was little. She had tonsillitis, and sometimes she would be trembling with fever. And at the same time, his grandmother was dying. And in her last moments and in her delirium, she was saying, Jesus, Jesus, he is so precious to me. And I told the woman, you write in solitude out of the stuff that's in your own life, and then you throw it out there. And I keep thinking of Longfellow's poem, The Arrow and the Song. You shoot an arrow, you sing a song into the air, and you lose total control then, where it goes and how it comes. Now, 50 years later, we are being called by the New York Times to say, where did this song come from? But that beautiful kid that was playing the piano, who has lost his whole property, all the trees, and his house had no roof on it as he sang. And the soggy piano that he said has gotten progressively worse because of the moisture now ruining the piano. Yes. He said, I just had to sit and refocus. Mm-hmm. And what was really important.
And what lasts, and what passes away.
So we talked about that with the wonderful lady from the New York Times, was so charming. And she said, what all of us, the most important thing any of us do is to prioritize what is really lasting, what matters here, what really matters. And he said, my little 13-acre kingdom, you blew away. But there was something about that name.
I have to say, just as a word of personal testimony, that particular just phrase, and I'm not a musician, but some things were embedded in me, and that's one. And I have found myself just in the moment, without even thinking it through, singing that to myself. Kings and kingdoms will all pass away, but there's just something about that name. And of course, that name is the name of Jesus. Yes. And that is such a blanket of encouragement and hope that I think once you hear the song and once it sinks in, it always will surface again at an important moment, just as that fellow in Kentucky. All of these anecdotes are just the tip of the iceberg of a global phenomenon that has been delivered by the hands of Bill and Gloria Gaither. And there's so much to talk about with that, but I have to ask, you've referred to yourself already, Bill, as two little farm kids. Well, here you are from the heart of the country in the United States. You, Bill, native to Indiana. I think Gloria grew up in Michigan, where your dad was a pastor. Yeah. But that's a neighboring state, same neighborhood.
She grew up in Michigan, but she moved here as soon as she read about it.
As soon as she could spell Indiana, she thought, someday I'm going there. But they do seem like unlikely addresses to have produced something that has had such universal impact in the world. I mean, we're not just talking about in our culture, but transcending culture. Let's get back to where it started. So the two of you are a team. How did you meet? Where did that come from?
You know, it's interesting that you bring up the team thing, because it's also been interesting watching marriages, and public marriages, political marriages. And in our field, in the music field, it's very easy for a guy to sing a duet with a girl. I'm talking about secular music at this point. And you're singing a love song to her and say, boy, we make beautiful music together. And then all of a sudden they, quote, quote, fall in love. Mark Lowry, the comedian, the Christian comedian, kids me and says, you knew a meal ticket when you saw it, Bill. And I said, no. You don't want to understand. I was teaching at the local high school, and she came in mid-year because the French teacher was out for a couple months because of breast cancer. And she was substituting in French. I met her, and we started talking and went to lunch together 2 or 3 times. I was drawn to her because of her. She was very bright. I'm not the brightest bulb in the room, but I always like to hang around people who are bright for some reason.
And you recognize that in Gloria.
And I recognize that. So I said, this is an interesting girl. And unlike some of the other girls I had dated, she had some stuff to her. We got a little picture in our studio there of her hands on her hip, a 5 or 6 year old girl. And I should have seen that picture before I married her. And we were drawn together because of ideas and because of a passion for a faith and questioning minds. We both loved history. We certainly loved poetry. And by poetry, I don't mean roses are red, violets are blue, but I mean the two of us can walk into a room and look at each other across the room. And I know what she's thinking. She knows what I am thinking.
There's a novel here.
And then I got to be honest with you. I found out she was also a good kisser. I said, that seals the deal.
I mean, sealed with a kiss. So, somebody should write a song like that. But what were you teaching? She was teaching French.
I was teaching English.
Okay, but both of those are languages. Those are disciplines of language, and that's
and she also taught English and literature also.
But I just have to think that I'm a guy who thinks that mastering a language or toying with it or recognizing its power is a key to a lot of other things in life. And both of you had that to start with. And that's no surprise that would develop into a style of communication, a medium of language that's set to music too. Now, I have to ask you, Gloria, he's kind of given us a word picture of, as Bill's talking, I see the school building, I see him in the hall, I see the new substitute coming in who's filling in for the teacher who's out with illness. What do you remember about the first time you saw Bill Gaither? What would you say?
Well, I had a friend in college that had gone to see Bill and his brother and sister at a concert in Detroit. And
they were already singing as a trio.
They were singing as a trio, working their way through college early on, and she came back into my room and she said she had seen Bill's brother, and she just said, "Oh, he's so beautiful." She says, "I just found out that you're going to be substituting in the school where where the brother is teaching," and she said, "You got to meet him and get me a date with his brother." So. when Bill,
A story of my life. Story.
Your brother overshadowed.
Was a good-looking guy.
so Bill was coming down the hall, and he pretended to drop his pencil in front of me, and I thought, this is really corny. And he stooped over to pick it up, and he said, "Hello there. What's your name?" And I said, "Gloria Sickle. Who are you?" And he said, "Bill Gaither." I said, "Oh, my girlfriend wants to meet your brother." And he said, that line is the story of my life. Everybody wants to meet my brother. I never did get around to introducing the two of them, but we did go to lunch and eventually started dating. And a year from then, we were married. And it's interesting that I know you are a wordsmith and a word lover. I think we came together over the power of words, whether it was political words, people running for office, or journalistic words, but mostly over poetry, because we were both English majors. And we discussed a lot of literature. And still today, that is, I would have to say, not maybe my first love, but close second.
It's still a deep vein.
And the power of words and the stewardship of using words, because words can be used to destroy. Words can be used to slant and lie and twist and put some kind of spin that is not actual and is not true. The use of words is something that needs to be consecrated, I think.
It's fascinating because as you describe the dark side.
The dark side.
The antithesis of that is words can inspire and they can give life and bring hope. And
so the story we just talked about, to us, it's overwhelmingly amazing that a song we wrote 50 years ago when our little daughter was, 2 years old, is still cycling around someplace out there in the stratosphere and lands in this tornado, destroyed life. And a man that knows God is saying, okay, I got to sit down here and refocus a minute. I've lost everything, but my family's okay. And there was the song. So the stewardship of words, I think I wish our politicians understood that there is a stewardship of words. You can't just throw them around.
And the legacy of them, what you're describing is once they're released, they take on a life that you cannot control. And
more than that, Jim, how many people have you ministered to over your years who were destroyed by maybe a sentence their father said?
That's right. And it goes on. There's a legacy to it.
It just sticks in your brain. Your dad said, "You're amazing. You're going to be something," or he said, "I wish you'd never been born," and that pretty much depends the course of a person's life. So, the power of words is sobering.
And often we don't think about it, but then the two of you have been thinking about that.
We think about it a lot.
and what that led to is we have two school teachers who come together for several reasons, words among them. And how did you get from the classroom to this place where your words are carried everywhere? We've already learned, Bill, that you were singing already, that you were with your brother and sister in a trio.
I came from a blue-collar family. My mother and father were salt of the earth. I mean, they just couldn't have been any better. But none of our people really went to college, okay? And we go to family dinners, and they talk about their kids going to, today would be Ivy Tech or Purdue, or they're going to be a tool and die maker. Most of our family would do things with their hands, fixing stuff. My brother who was also good looking, was also a very good mechanic. I can't fix anything, okay? So the dinners, they would ask, what's your kid going to do? And they come around to Dad, and they'd say, what's Bill going to do? He loves music. the second question always was, what's he going to do for a living?
Yeah, and that was an honest question from their context.
It's a very fair question. And when young artists come to me today to say, can you help me do this professionally? Because, everybody has to choose something that they do for a living. And can you give me any advice? And my advice most of the time is, and I don't mean this in a cynical way, but get a day job. Which I did, because for a year after I was out of high school, I tried to do this professionally, and a good thing happened. We starved to death. And I had to realize you are not equipped to do what you want to do. So that's when I went back to college and got my degree. I minored. I didn't major in music. I don't have the patience to teach, because that comes very easy to me. So I didn't have the patience to work with kids and peck out notes, because I'd done that all my life with my sister and brother. So I said, I just want to do that. And I made straight A's in that without even trying. I worked myself to death on my major, trying to learn how to do get prepared to do the English thing and teach it. And to be honest with you, after I got into it, it was starting to open up a whole nother world. Here's how God works. Because had I gone out and done music when I was 19 and that's all, my writing would have been limited. I would never had the opportunity to meet a gal this bright and this sharp, My world started widening, and I really loved teaching. I became...
You were an amazing teacher.
I meet people in this town who still remember you as their teacher.
The interesting thing...
The last time I met an ex-student, he had a red light on his car. He said, Mr. Gaither. I said, yes. He said, I had you in an 11th grade English class. I said, oh, I hope I gave you a good grade. But I got to love teaching. And then I met her, and just for the fun of it, we didn't get paid to do it. We started directing plays. We did Thornton Wilder's Our Town.
Because we were teaching the plays in literature.
We were teaching the plays. And that play is more than just a play for kids. That's about life. Yeah. When Emily comes back and asks the stage manager, do anybody ever realize life while they're living? There were so many principles and stuff you could teach. And I loved it. And I kept teaching, but I never gave up on this music thing. I still loved it. And at night I'd play around with it, and we still continued. And that's when we started writing. And when I had written, we have a few BG songs before Gloria, and every now and then I kid her. I said, "Don't forget that's a BG song, Gloria." Now the good ones came after Gloria, but. So, and then we started having kids, and she quit teaching after 3 years. I continued on till I think 8 or 9, 10 years. And the writing thing just kept building and building, and people calling and saying, would you come and sing that song that you wrote? And would you bring your wife and let her talk a little bit about the song? We never had an agent. We never had a manager. We never had a promotion company. All we did was just work out of our house. And at the end of 10 years, and the school system was so kind, and the principal, Shorty Bertzel, who just passed away a couple of years ago, said, hey, if you need to take off on Friday and fly out to Oakland, we understand that. We want to do anything we can do to keep both of us. Even though she wasn't teaching, she was still involved.
Yes.
And finally, the night job overtook the day job. And I walked into Shorty's office and I said, we need to talk. He said, I knew this day was coming.
He could see it. He was a prophet.
And you know what? People will say, boy, I bet you're glad you left the classroom. I said, no, I didn't. I loved it. And I went screaming and kicking.
We just changed classrooms.
Yeah, because at heart, we are still teachers with the 20 or 15, 20, 25 kids that travel with us on the weekend. Every time we get a chance and say, Bob, Harry, Charlie, Sally, you got a second? Let's talk, okay? do you want to really continue doing that? It's just, once a teacher, always a teacher. But with this whole classroom, the ability to take words and music and say to an audience, I said, if you knew, you wouldn't want me. My scars are hidden by this face I wear. Oh, but he said, my child, my scars go deeper. It was love for you that put them there. I am loved. I'd say, sing it with us. I am loved. I could risk loving you, for the one who knows me best loves me most. I am loved. You are loved. Won't you please take my hand? We are free to love each other, for we are loved. The opportunity to take an idea out that could change the world. And we really felt like this is world-changing stuff.
Well, it is. And as you were just quoting that lyric of another one of your, I would call standards, there's something about the lyrics of your work matched to the genius of the melody. I mean, they do work together. But there's something tactile for me about them. You have a way of expressing very deep and important emotions and intellectual concepts, but in a way that can be understood almost in a sensory way. So, one of the great songs that launched the whole Gaither enterprise was He Touched Me. But just think about that. He touched me. It's not about something that's removed from me. It's not something external from me. It's something that intersects me in the most personal way. He touched me. The song Because He Lives, which I heard at the Taj Mahal, implausibly, I know has a story. I want to ask you about that, just as an illustration of how you come to create a work like that. But its lyrics have a very personal, tactile is my best word, that I can't escape feeling it. Tell me about Because He Lives, one of the great hymns of our time that will live far beyond any of us. How did it come about?
I'd like to grab something you just said that relates to all of this, in that you began by saying, we live in central Indiana. And one of the things central Indiana or Michigan or Ohio or Kentucky does for you, it grounds you. So I'm not surprised you're saying this is tactile. Our religion, our faith, our belief has to be also practical. It is ethereal and eternal, but it is also practical. It needs to be grounded in the dirt. It's got to be where the crops are raised. It's got to be where the kids go off to General Motors Tech to try to work in a General Motors factory. It is grounded in, how do I run my life? How can I make a life work? So, Because He Lives is a perfect example of that. That particular song, I think, has been used in more language settings across the world than any other, if we had to pick it. But it came out of the birth of one of our children, and it was at the end of the 60s. It was our son, Benji, and he was born in 70. So we had lived through the 60s, and it was still crazy. It was very similar to the setting right now in our country. Everybody was against everybody. The Vietnam War had just finished.
The country was very divided.
Very divided, very ugly, and Watts had just burned to the ground.
Racial tensions.
Everything was in chaos, and professors were giving LSD to their students as a spiritual experience. And we're pregnant now with our third baby. And we looked at each other and said, who in their right mind would bring a baby into this world? If it's like this now, what is this little guy going to have to face in 17, 18, 19 years when he's got to be in that mix? And there were several things that happened during that time, and the story's too long probably to discuss here. But one of them was we had a little A-frame company, a little office building, and we were so excited that we got to finally pave the parking lot. and it had been gravel and kind of mud. But that fall we got to pave it, and we watched that process. I really never watched it that close up with the big rocks at the bottom, and then these rollers come in, and then this smaller stone and the bigger stone and the gravel and the sand, and finally, the hot tar over all of that, and then more rollers and everything. Okay, so we're all excited. We got this parking lot. Come spring, Bill's quiet dad, who was a tool and die maker at General Motors.
And a farmer.
And a farmer. He comes in one morning at the office and he said, "Come out here a minute." So we followed him outside. He doesn't say much, so when he does, you just go with him. So he went out and he pointed to the middle of that driveway, that all those layers and that tar and that blacktop. He pointed not at the side, in the middle, and he said, "Look at that." So we looked at that. And in the middle of that blacktop was a little green shoot of a plant. And he just turned his back and walked back in the office. And so like him, and that among several other things that happened that year, just made you say, you don't have babies and buy a house and build a yard and build a driveway, pave a parking lot because the world is stable. When has the world ever been stable? You have babies and love each other and go on with your life because the resurrection is true. And we just said, okay, that's what we're going to nail to the wall. Because he lives, we can face tomorrow. And the first verse that we wrote was actually, how sweet to hold our newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance, this child can face uncertain days because he lives. And because he lives, we can face tomorrow. Very practical, very grounded, very Midwest, very green shoot in the middle of a parking lot.
The sun will come up.
But when we held that little bald-headed baby in our arms, it was like aha moment. Wow, we don't have this baby because the world's safe. We have this baby because the resurrection is true, and it's true at every level, clear to the grass that comes up through the parking lot.
And we make investments. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's really interesting frame for the lyric, which I was not familiar with, that we make investments. Mm-hmm. We pour our lives into the ground, into those around us, into our communities,
Absolutely.
into our houses, because he lives.
It was really interesting that Bonhoeffer, was in prison and he was engaged, and she had gone to get a little apartment where they were going to live when he got out of prison, they hoped. And she said, "Is this stupid? Is this stupid for me to go on and, get excited about our little apartment and buy dish towels and stuff for our apartment?" And he said, interesting, he said, "Absolutely not. It's okay for us to love the world. God loved it. He made it and he loved it. Let's go ahead and do our life. And if we get to do it, fine. If we don't, there's bigger things. But yes, go ahead and buy your dish towels."
And he never went to the apartment.
He never went to the apartment.
And they never got to be married.
Bonhoeffer, of course, imprisoned by the Nazis.
Yeah.
And would lose his life in that prison. But the idea that you don't stop because there are question marks or uncertainties or the unknown, because there are some things that You're talking here about a deep, fundamental frame of life that is grounded in your faith.
Did you build it on? That is what you put the ground. That's the ground. That's the ground.
And as I just think about that, though, let's just talk about that. Your faith. You both grew up in houses where your families, had understanding of the Christian faith, that Jesus was not a strange concept to you. Have you had moments in your life where you thought, "I'm not sure he does live. I'm not sure that that's really working for me"?
Okay. Yes, and let's answer that question. But before we get away from that, a person came up to us one time and said, "We sing that song, but we changed one word." I said, "What'd you change?" We say, "Because he lives, I'm excited about tomorrow. And we said, good for you, if that works for you. But I don't know how many people since then have said.
Well, in that same week that we got that letter saying they wanted to change the lyric, we also got a letter from a young father who had backed in the driveway out over his 3-year-old son on his tricycle. And he said, if I had not had this song,
I couldn't have faced it.
I could not have gotten up the next morning.
I could face tomorrow.
So we kept, I could face tomorrow.
I think that, for at least in my journey, that is a much more accurate approach.
And to answer your question about the doubt thing, I think from the very beginning, and maybe this is because of Indiana roots, and maybe it's because of my dad, who basically looked at our marriage when we first got married and said, well, it seemed like it ought to work, but let's see.
Wait and see. He was a wait-and-see guy. I've got a lifetime. We'll
and
see
after 10 or 15 years, he said, you got a good one here, Bill. You got it. So to say, yes, there have been times in our lives. I can remember one time I had a relative that came in and he had tried the faith business, and it didn't work for him. He was very emotional. He's very talented, very bright, but worked out, very physical. And he said, I can't believe this stuff. And he said, and neither would you. And this really crushed. I think this statement crushed me more than any other statement. He said, and neither would you if you didn't make your living doing it.
You're in it for the dollars.
And that threw him into a pit of depression. That
I had mono for about.
And he was like, is there any truth to this? I mean, this guy's, he's wild, but is there any truth to this?
Is there any truth to that? I don't know how many times we would leave the city limits and say, now, why are we doing this again? Why are we doing this? And when I talk to secular reporters today, and they say, why are you still doing it at 85? I said, it's interesting. Probably for the same reason we did it at 25. Number one, I believe in the message. I believe in the resurrection. I believe in the little sprout coming up. I believe in hard times, that this stuff can help get you through it. So I believe in what we're saying. And number two, I just love the aesthetic form of 4-part harmony and the beautiful thing.
The beauty of it, actually.
The beauty of it. And I can't find any other reason for doing it.
Well, those are pretty good ones, those two.
Those are pretty good ones.
Evidently, so about half the composers that you've ever heard of thought so too.
Yeah.
Gave us beauty out of it.
But out of those months of saying, are we kidding ourselves in all of this? We wrote, I believe, help thou my unbelief. I take the finite risk of trusting like a child. I believe. Help thou my unbelief. I walk into the unknown, trusting all the while. I long so much to feel the warmth that others seem to know. But should I never feel a thing, I claim him even so. I believe. Help thou my unbelief. I walk into the unknown, trusting all the while. Now, that's a Gloria lyric. Now, obviously, the scripture comes from the Bible, but
that changes everything, doesn't it? If that's your approach.
Yeah.
In the way in which you face life and tomorrow.
Yeah.
I wish I could say I'm an easy believer, but I'm not. I can't stop my mind. And to be a quester is important to me. To be a cynic is my biggest fear. I don't want to reach this stage in my life and be a cynic. I want to have proven some things true because I tested it in the crucible of life. And I still believe it.
And here you are.
Here I
It's a
am.
little bit like your marriage to Bill and your father-in-law's progression.
We'll
You know,
wait and see.
I think maybe we've seen enough now to know this has got a future.
And you know what? In all fairness, some of that stuff that has been out here has not landed until the last 5 or 10 years of our lives, finally saying, okay, I told you to trust me. When it's all said and done, I think that's what the scriptures do, and that's what a great gospel song in the hymn does, is it helps you keep things in perspective. Stuart Hamlin said, the things of earth will dim and lose their value. If we'll recall, they're just borrowed for a while. Things of earth that cause his heart to tremble, remembered there, will only bring a smile. But until then, my heart's going to go. If I didn't believe that, I hate to be competing against a guy who did believe that.
That's right, because that does give you an edge.
Well, I mean, it's going to get you up every morning.
Yeah.
When you think about it, I mean, here you are quoting poetry in lyrics to me to express important ideas. It is so powerful and compelling. With 800 songs, copyright. There's a file somewhere. There's a big metal file with Gaither too, copyrights. I know it's impossible for you to identify, which one is your favorite. What do you think will live on the longest? Or maybe let me reframe the ask. You told me once, Bill, that we were talking more broadly about Christian music, and every year, I don't know, there's so many songs every year that are generated new, and some are a thing, they're a buzz in the moment, but we know that they're probably not going to live on for another decade or two. But some things just seem to have transcendent power. You told me that you believe that Twyla Paris had a song about how beautiful
Is a body of Christ.
it's just, and you felt like that's a song that can live beyond a generation or so on.
It should.
And it should. It certainly should.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, here you have this body of work. We've already called out a few tunes that we know have circumnavigated the globe, and people are still, after 5 decades, finding life in them. From your own point of view, I know it may feel awkward, but I mean, with 800 titles, are there a couple that you think, no, this is going to outlive us?
Okay, let me give you a lyric of a song that may outlive us, may not, and many of your audience may not know it. But I have said several times, and I think I have been quoted by some scholars somewhere. That's a joke, okay? But I couldn't think of a scholar to quote me on it. But I have said that I think good theology is good psychology. There was a time in the evangelical church where psychology was way over here and theology was way over. And the old timers would say, don't talk about it, don't pray about it. Well, we definitely should pray about it. But there's some things that's going to take more than a trip to the altar to really alter a person's life. So I think good psychology is also good theology. This is her lyric, so I can brag on it. I think it's one of the best she ever wrote. I repent for moments I have spent recalling all the pain and failures of my past. I repent for dwelling on the things beyond my power to change, the chains that held me fast. I will go on. The past I leave behind me. I gladly take His mercy and His love. He is strength and He is peace. He is joy and sweet release. I know He is, and I am His. I will go on. Now here's the confessional verse I think is just beautiful. I give up the bitterness and hate and blaming men and fate for all my discontent. The guilt and pain I empty from my cup so God can fill it up with peace and sweet content. I will go on. The past I leave behind me. Whether that will outlive us or not, I wish it would, because I think it could be healing not only today, but I think it could be healing 2084. I think there's an old hymn that says, I give up bitterness and hate. So that may live, that may not. I think it deserves to live because of her great lyrics.
That's right.
Sometimes my music, I think, holds back because stylistically, I think it's fun, but styles come and go. But the lyric, that's when there's so many,
Yes.
there's so many extra tunes to old hymns.
Because the lyrics can fit with different styles of music per se, but the lyric captures it. Gloria, what would you say? You've listened to Bill claim some of your own verse. What stands out for you?
One of my favorites musically and I think concept wise is his love reaching. Love has always been there in the chaos of our world. It was the word that echoed through the formless void. And whether in the universe or worlds of our own minds, it is his love that turns our chaos into joy. His love went on reaching. His love went on longing right past the shackles of my mind. And the word of the Father became Mary's little son. And love reached all the way to where I was. The birth of Jesus wasn't the first time God came into the world. I mean, he was there from the beginning, and so was Jesus with the Father. But his this unreachable, big, unfathomable, omnipresent, all of those words we say, is not what God. It's not his character. His character is love, and we don't even have a word for it. You can love pizza and you can love Lincoln cars and whatever. We don't have we don't have a word for it in our language. But it isn't what God does. It's what he is. And so to me, the concept that he's not going to let some rebellious teenage angel steal away the glory that he intended for us to have. And, original sin wasn't original. Original glory was original.
That's the first thing.
And it will be what he will have. And he won't give up on us.
Now, we both gave you songs that are not in the mainstream of what we've done. To answer your question as far as what the people think, we have mentioned Because He Lived. We mentioned He Touched Me. I think there's something about that name, Jesus that will probably be around. There might be a chance for something beautiful, something good. All my confusions, he understood. All I had to offer him was brokenness and strife. Yeah. But he made something beautiful in my life. I'd like to think that maybe that might outlive us. And probably in some circles, we sang it the other night, and people really got excited again about it. And that is, the King is coming. The King is coming. I just heard the trumpet sounding. And now, so we've written off so many different kinds of stuff.
Well, come on. How about I'm a promise, I'm a possibility? I mean, that still bounces in my head because my children grew up with that song, and it became a part of me too. I mean, they're masterworks. They really are. I'm not just polishing your card here.
Interesting. I Am a Promise is right up there on our reporting with Because He Lives and some of the other things. One of the reasons is it's made the news network so many times because of children, in
inner city,
in neighborhoods where they don't seem to have a chance.
And maybe disadvantaged in other ways.
We see them sing, some teacher is singing it to them. And it's like, oh, that's where a song should go.
Absolutely.
It should be said to a 5-year-old kid who doesn't have every advantage. He's a promise.
There's one other song that comes to mind. we'd written a lot, and I had a friend who was a manager, Richard Smallwood, who's a great black gospel artist, a graduate of Howard University, a great classical keyboard player. Said, "Would you like to write with Richard?" I said, "I'd love to do it." So I went in. And he said, "I said, how much time you have?" He says, 30 minutes. That's all. And he said, "Do you have an idea?" And I said, "Yeah, we have what I call a hook book, and we had seen a phrase in the book that we were reading. It said, 'Jesus, you're the center of my joy.'" And so I mentioned that to Richard. He said, "Oh, that'd be fun." So he sat down, and boy, you talk about player, he can play. "Jesus, you're the center of my joy." And the rest of the tune, we just went da 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 da. He said, "What are we going to do about the da da das?" I said, "Well, I have a little gal I live with up in Indiana." Well, to make a long story short, we finished the tune. Richard recorded it, and it became it got the Stellar Award that year. That was given at the Apollo Theater in New York,
in Harlem,
and Whitney Houston was there, and that was in '89. And
Mississippi Mass Choir, it was amazing.
And so Gloria and I went because we received a lot of awards, but this was totally another thing. And they loved it in the black church, and a lot of the white congregations they sing it too. It was interesting. I would go into a black church, maybe in the office area, and somebody'd say, "This is Bill Gaither," and there would be 10, 15 people around, and they'd say, "Hi, nice to meet you." I said, "He co-wrote Jesus, You're the Center of My Joy" with Richard Smallwood. The chairs would turn and said, "He did." He did.
Bill Gaither.
Now that was, after writing all the stuff that we had written, a lot of country things that country artists had.
Actually, you mentioned awards. That is the one award that I'm really proudest of, is Black Gospel Song of the Year.
Yes.
In all of our collection. And mainly because that amazing memory of that night with that Mississippi Mass Choir coming down the aisle, with no instruments but their hands. And it was just an amazing experience. And
you have some awards, and there's no shortage of shelf space, vacant shelves in the Gaither complex with Grammys and Dove Awards and things like you've just named. And you've also been invited to some very extraordinary stages around the country. You've produced films and music. I remember seeing in your offices a picture. You were at the White House, I think, in the East Room, some kind of celebration of gospel music. And I mean, when you look back at all of those places you've been, and a sold-out concert in Brazil, or maybe South Africa, or in Belfast. I mean, A to Z. But here you are in your house of 55 years in Alexandria that you purchased when you were teaching school.
But let me tell you what's worth more than all of that. A week ago, our grandson, who's now an adult, and he's in New York majoring in composition, finish a master's program in composition.
At NYC.
At NYC. And he called and said, "Mama, did you write this song, Something Beautiful?"
And he's so far ahead of me musically.
Like,
he's a genius.
He gets the cosmos. He might not know if he has on shoes, but he's got. And he said, "I'm just listening to that. What made you write that? How as much is that?
What's that worth?"
Again, the discovery of a generation in your own family.
In my own family.
It's so amazing.
The sprouts still come up through the pavement,
Well, and I just think you might have lived anywhere you wanted to live. I mean, after a while, the music and the productions and all the rest give you the capacity to make choices that you might not have had if you were still teaching in the public school. And yet you have chosen to stay in the place where you describe, Gloria, as a place of being grounded. And I just wonder sometimes, do you ever think about, well, why didn't we go to Nashville? Because you'd have to do a lot of work in Nashville. Nashville's kind of a center of gospel music and, Music City, so they call it. Maybe you should go out to LA. I mean, there's got a lot of studio work out there. Or why not that apartment overlooking Central Park? Or, there's just 100 things that you might dream about. Tell me about the joy and the pleasure of Alexandria, Indiana, somewhat north of Indianapolis on a little 2-lane state road called 9.
Yeah, when we were kids, the word around town was Alexandria. It was 60 miles north of Indianapolis. So the word was that we were 60 miles from the nearest known sin.
I think we've imported something.
Probably imported something. That's a fair question. And the first thing that comes to my mind, you hear this phrase a lot, people who have your back. Unless I'm misreading it, honey, I think that little town still has our back. I think I think if somebody would come in and try to hurt us in any kind of way, right. They'd say, hey, that's not the Bill and Gloria that I know. That's important to me. And those are people, I just had a call from a friend that I've known since high school. He's my age. He's in my class. And he just got our Christmas card or something. And he was so moved by the card and what Gloria had written in the card. I told Gloria, I said, I'll tell the names, Ron and Deanne. I said, you know what? We don't have any better friends than Ron.
That's right.
Yeah.
They do anything for us.
And they're in your town.
Yeah, and maybe it took 50 years for that. Maybe he was like a George Gaither. I have to wait and see if this thing's going to work.
He was kind of like a George Gaither.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest reason. And we have probably written more about home than anybody. So many of our songs, that we have this moment to hold in our hands and to touch as it slips through our fingers like sand. Yesterday's gone and tomorrow may never come. We have this moment today, and it happens to be in a little town called Alexandria, Indiana. It's been so good to us. So anyway. And who else comes from a town that they'd put your name on the water tower and say, the home of the Gaithers?
I guess that probably wouldn't happen in Paris after all.
That wouldn't happen in Paris.
And I just wonder how many people drive by that water tower and say, who's that?
Who's the
Gaithers? Well, your reach, your musicians, your artists, your lyricists. There's so much we could talk on for days. We haven't even touched the idea of music itself, the mystery of the melody. But I also want to acknowledge or invite you to comment on, I think, a calling that you saw develop in your career, which was not just to speak and to share and to give this gift of song and ideas, but also to look behind you. Who's coming up behind us? Who's going to stand on the stage next? And if we looked at the genre of gospel music, there are very few persons that we could name that have achieved some renown or status or audience that haven't had some contact with the Gaithers, or many, many who would say, we wouldn't be here if it were for the Gaithers. Your capacity to build out beyond the trio, to the vocal band, to an entourage, to a studio filled with people, old and young. I don't know that there's anything like that in any kind of entertainment. And I don't mean to diminish the gospel as entertainment, but it has a certain kind of crowd draw. I don't know that has any peer anywhere. What do you think about that? Is it true? Am I assuming correctly? You actually, by design, intentionally think, you know what, we need to be watching out. Or is it just something that kind of organically comes alongside and you bring him along?
We used to say, if it doesn't fly at the bakery, it doesn't fly, which is a good thing, because we've been in many rooms of in Nashville, as you mentioned, and you tend in a room like that to write for each other rather than for the real people. And for us, it's been important to stay with the real people, just to stay there and not not become a professional songwriter or musician or whatever. Coming home on Saturday night, flying all night to get home is very important. Very important.
To address that business about, who's going to take our place and all that, I don't think that ever entered my mind. But what does enter my mind is when I saw a kid the other night at the Pacer game do the anthem. I said, where'd that kid come from? I said, from Anderson University.
A student from Anderson University, which is your alma mater.
Yeah. And I said, how did that talent get by without me?
How am I just discovering it at the Pacer game?
Yeah. We go to a lot of meetings, and there's one we love in Nashville. It's a Songwriters Award night, and that's country writers.
Country songwriters, right.
And it's true there, but it's not true at the Country Music Awards. It's not true at the Dove Awards. It's not true. But at the Writers Award, they all go in awe of everybody else in the room.
There's a certain humility about the people.
It literally blows my mind. And I think I'm pretty much like that. When I hear a great singer, I just go, or when I hear a great keyboard player,
or a great song.
Or a great song. I don't care where it came from. A great song is, I just mentioned Stuart Hamlin. I could quote so many of his lyrics the whole night, And Fanny Crosby is still around because of great lyrics. And I think because of that, I have seen that. I've seen great vocal talent. I've seen great keyboard talent. I say, boy, that kid is amazing. We need to find a way, not because I'm so spiritual or anything, but the world needs to hear this guy, And it's just like, and the night is going to be better. And if he wins, we all win, I'll never forget one time when somebody said, does that bother you? It's when Sandi first started singing with us. Every night she gets up there, she's got the home run spot. Wow. And every night it was
Sandi Patty.
Yeah. It was out of the ballpark. And they said, does that bother you? I said, what? In fact, the people are on their feet. I said, she's on our team.
That's right. If she wins, we're all winning later.
Yeah, we're all winning.
We just hit a home run or something. Now, there's got to, I know you're the theologian. There's got to be a scriptural base for that or something,
Well, Sandi was the first guest on this podcast. And as we talked to her about her journey, and she had some great stories to tell, of course, but she several times mentioned that what she learned from Bill and Gloria Gaither, and how she, I learned this, and when I walked into the studio, I remember what Bill said, or this is what, and what that just, it was very natural. There was nothing staged about it. It was her natural explanation of her own trajectory and understanding of her craft, and how powerful your influence was for her for the good. And that's just one of many stories. And that's another dimension to what God has provided for you. Because, as I said, I'm not aware of any other kind of like peer relationships where people who have achieved the success you have been so influential in the lives of others who also are called into this work. And it is a calling. It's an anointing. Yeah. And I just have to say, for just the one little guy out there, thanks for doing that, because my world is better because not only of what you've done, but the way in which you've put others also up front. And that brings us to, here the Gaithers are going back out on the road again and always, still hosting events, big events. Maybe it's the standalone event on a holiday weekend, or maybe it's that production somewhere, or you're back in your home thinking about a song. Is there one more coming out? Are you still wrestling with tunes and lyrics?
Yes. Let me tell you one.
Actually, the whole COVID 2 years has been, to shut us in with ideas as we've just sort of blossomed during this time writing-wise. So, we've got a whole bunch we want to tell you about. So you tell him one.
Well, we just got to do Christmas.
Yeah,
Mark, here's Bill, the musician and trumpeter.
Okay, folks, if you've enjoyed this brief television presentation.
This is Martin Bailey right here.
But Woody Wright and I were walking buddies. We were riding one day, or walking, and we said, and Gloria and I have said many times, isn't it amazing that the angels started singing the night Jesus was born? And they started singing, and they kept singing. Pretty soon, musicians all over the world started. I don't know of any other person that's had as much music and art written about than Jesus has. So the whole thing is amazing. So the songs go on and on and on, and it came down to Bach, Beethoven, and Handel, Mendelssohn. I mentioned that to Kevin Williams the other night, and I couldn't think of the last name. He said, "Don't ask me. They were your friends." Okay. But anyway, we said, we need to write a song that said the song goes on and on and on and on. And so we wrote this tune, and we just came off of our Christmas tour and sang it every night. And the song goes, heaven and nature sings, and the song goes, heaven and nature, and the song goes on. And then there's a place where the whole crowd sings, joy to the world, the Lord has come. And the song goes on and on and on. And it ends up by singing, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the song goes on and on. Heaven and nature sings. That just comes out of joy of life, of putting rhythm fields together with great hooks, which is not my hook. All heaven and nature saying, of course, comes from joy to the world. That's a new idea that came out of last year. And then people get depressed over politics. They get depressed over periods of time. And somebody came up to me here a while back and said, does this bother you politically, or something was going on politically? And I said, the darker the night, the brighter the light. Oh, that'd be good. The darker the night, the brighter the light, the dark. So we've written a new song called The Darker Night, and we ended up singing, this little light of mine.
It just all flows naturally.
The most powerful weapon we have is that little song that we learned in Sunday school. This little light of mine. I think we ought to shut up and let our light shine a bit more. Shut up is a pretty hard word to be saying.
It's about as good as you get, right? It really is important, because you don't kill the darkness with a sword.
It can only be pushed back by the light.
You kill the darkness with a light.
And so we keep writing and writing. And she has co-written with a lot of younger writers. She is writing some wonderful hymns with Michael W. Smith. I think Michael W. Smith might write some of the greatest melodies of anybody in this century. I'm serious. I mean, the kid is good. He's really been gifted in melody. And so I tell her, hey, so she's co-written with a lot of other musicians. I'm pretty limited. I'm good at what I do, but I'm pretty limited. So.
Well,
you're not very limited.
I'm just saying, the world is brighter because Bill and Gloria Gaither got together and followed their calling and their heart. And the audience still engaged, an audience that has transcended decades, an audience that still is gathering, is proof enough that for me, that there is an anointing, there is a spirit, there's a magic, if I could say that in a righteous way. There is a certain mystery about what you do, and yet that mystery is born by the hand of God, and it speaks still. And whether it be at the Taj Mahal, or whether it be in Kentucky after a tornado, or at church on Sunday, or in the concert hall, thank you for what you do and what you have done for all of us. It's been such a joy to have you with us today at All That to Say. All that to say, you're not going to find anybody better than Bill and Gloria Gaither. They are the best.
Jim, you're very kind. Bless you, my friend.
Been fun.
Thank you.
For more information, visit allthattosay.org. Thank you for joining the conversation. Don't forget to like and subscribe.